So this video is going to be a summary of the 16 types from a kind of top-down approach. Going to be looking at larger groups and then getting into smaller groups. So the group that we're going to start with is the NTP and SFJ quadra group, whatever. So the NTPs and the SFJs have NESI and TIFE. So let's start with TIFE. Specifically the feeling function. The feeling functions is my best approximation is that they are kind of like, what do you want to align with? Where are your values? Are they external or are they internal? Are they external and you need to harmonize with them, or are they internal and you need to kindle them? And so with extroverted feeling, the stuff that you need to align yourself with is external, and creating a harmonious atmosphere out of that involves breaking down distinctions between things. So, for example, someone might say like race doesn't matter. We should base them on. They'll say race doesn't matter, so it's easier to have a kind of things aren't as separate. Things can be joined in a kind of communion. And then introverted thinking is kind of a response to that. Kind of like has to say like, okay, well, what's left? What classification? Because the thinking functions do want to make classifications, not alignments. So when you break down those external classifications, like race, for example, introverted thinking comes and then says, okay, well, what's left? And they say, well, we're all human, and it's finding these kind of larger, more ideational classifications rather than just kind of external, factual classifications. And then they also have NESI, and NESI, well, SI is kind of a function that does a lot of checking. It experiences something, and then it also kind of compares it to its past experience, or it hears it experiences an object, and it cross-references it with the facts that they know. So it's kind of it's a slower function, because it's always cross-checking and reflecting, but then it's also building up this kind of grand codification, this grand kind of like pillar of truth is the imagery that comes to mind. And then extroverted intuition is not doing this kind of reflective checking. It sees an object and it immediately associates that object and makes these intuitive evocations and analogies, and compares, and it kind of, when you have all these comparisons between the objects, it's like the analogy that Celebrated Types uses, or the image that they use, is connecting the dots. And then kind of when you have this grand connected dots picture, that's where the introverted sensation, cannot say these words that I haven't said in a while, comes in and creates this grand codification of all that stuff. And so that's kind of, those are those two axes. And the way that those two axes combine is you have kind of an external world of kind of connections and unity, and then an internal world of codification and firm ideas. And there's no type that experiences an external world so like one-sidedly. They also have the internal world, but with the introverted types in this group, there's more. They experience more of the internal solidness, whereas the extroverted types in this group are experiencing more of the approximations, more of the kind of fluidity. And so I characterize the NE, FE, ESFJ, and ENTP group, if you want to call them that, in this greater quadra group, as kind of like conversational. I think that's the word that Michael Pierce used, and it just kind of popped up into my head because it's a good word and it describes it well. But conversational is I think what he says, and it's a good word because it's kind of like there's an emphasis on fluidity there, on not getting tied down to any one particular idea or one particular final truth. And then so the ENTPs are afraid of kind of like, maybe not fear is the best word, but they don't want to be pinned down. They always want to have the opportunity to make corrections and change because of their repressed introverted sensing. And then the ESFJ wants to have the freedom to make whatever connections they want and not be reliant on whatever kind of ideational classification is made. And then the ISFJ is seeking something more solid. It's seeking something more that's less fluid and more kind of like everlasting. It's kind of I don't want to use too much religious imagery with with introverted sensation, but it's kind of fitting. They want something kind of eternal and something that can be held on to, that's steadfast. And then the INTP, and so that's a kind of indicative of dominant introverted sensation and repressed extroverted intuition. And then there's the INTPs who have repressed extroverted feeling, and they are kind of all about these classifications. Then they don't mind too much external conflict, or actually they might view emotions and expression as kind of being a little too much, a little too conflict, too chaotic, and they prefer their internal, very orderly and investigative internal world, because that's really what the TISI thing is. It's very it's the empirical functions, and they're internal, so it's a very kind of investigative, like everything's getting filtered through this kind of like, okay, well, what is this? How does it fit in with everything else? And they also want to, because of their tertiary SI, as opposed to the ENTP's inferior SI, they're always trying to like get some kind of like solid firmament, some kind of footing for whatever truth that they're building up. Whereas the ENTP, doesn't really want or need a firm footing, because they think that in itself might be a distortion. So moving on to the NFJs and the STPs, the difference between these two is actually between the NTPs and the SFJs and the NFJs and the STPs is actually very interesting, because like TIFE seems it's more passive than FITE. It seems it just kind of wants to understand and join, rather than create and change and experience, which would be the FITE. But so the FETI is more passive and just wants to understand and join. But because they don't have NESI, they have SENI. It's more of an intense understanding, like what's the meaning, what's going on here. Whereas the SFJs and the NTPs are kind of content to make general abstract truths. Not so with the NFJs and the STPs. And it's important to understand kind of the difference here between NI and TI. And I think one of the helpful ways to understand that difference is to look at their corresponding functions. So TI has FE, and what FE is breaking down distinctions and trying to join things together and harmonize them. And then it comes in and says, okay, well, what's common here? What's the classification that we can make here? Whereas NI has SE, and SE isn't concerned with classifications at all. It just has the data, and the NI comes in and interprets the data and says, well, okay, this is what's going on here. This is what this means. This is what essentially is happening. And and this can change based on two things, which is why it's more fluid. It can change based on how much more data they get, Whereas with SE, with NE, it's just like if I get more data, that's just like a bigger constellation. But with SE, it can change the actual picture itself, and then NI, it's changed because it's intuitive rather than it's associative rather than just experiential. Like not just experiential. It's associative, not just. I can't not say that. It's associative, not experiential like introverted sensation is. So it's more amorphous and it's not building up a single truth. It's trying to find a perspective on this data, and perspective is one of the key words with introverted intuition, and it changes perspective. It can change perspective and give new kind of paradigms, and so that's why SENI is more dynamic than NESI. So. In summary, you've got the STPs in this group who are kind of seeking a kind of like, okay, well, this is what the thing really is. This is what it's basically all about. So like you've got Miyamoto Musashi, who's just kind of like, all sword arting is just basically this. Get rid of the kind of the fluff. And so they're trying to create like, okay, well, this is just basically what it is, but they're also adapting to more and more data, and they don't want to be too dogmatic because they want to be able to change and respond to more extroverted sensation data. And then the NFJs, their kind of whole synthesis deal is about changing kind of how you look at things, so that you can better become one, or better become someone who's going to like have the best relationship to the outside world is the only wording I can think of for them. And then the ENFJ is more concerned with kind of like the actual data and responding to that, and creating change with the actual data. And the INFJ is kind of more concerned with finding out kind of like these abstract truths about the data, and they don't want to get too involved with the data. Celebrity Types just added Alain de Botton. I don't know how to say his name. And one of the things that he was like one of the quotes about him was that he likes airports because you can watch the people, but you don't have to get too involved. And that's kind of I think a very good description of like the whole INFJ. Their observational introverted intuition and extroverted feeling, and then their lack of extroverted sensation, and their kind of tinkering, like, okay, well, what's the thing that's going on here, introverted thinking. And then the ISTP also has that observational kind of side. Like Carl Pilkington is kind of a good example, and he has these very kind of odd perspectives that like they're almost NE perspective, like kind of in their quirkiness, and that's kind of the unique perspectives that come from introverted intuition. And then ESTPs are obviously more engaged in the communion than the ISTPs, and they're not just lone wolfing it. They don't have an emphasis on lone wolfing it, but they do have an emphasis on independence, which is a little bit different. They want everyone to be able to do their own thing, but they can do it together. It's kind of like I don't know. I can't think of a good analogy, but yeah, that's the STPs and the NFJs. So now we're going to do the NFPs and the STJs, and this group is kind of the most complex for me to understand. I don't know if you could hear me behind my hands. Basically, they're like the NTPs, but they have more of a separation with this from the outside world and the self because of their introverted feeling, and they need to kindle that and protect it and create external classifications so that they can kind of protect it. They don't want to be kind of... Think of it as kind of like Buddhism versus Christianity. And I know obviously there are FETI Christians and there are FITE Buddhists, but the Buddhists, there's no distinction between the self and the other. Like it's all just one, and it's all about becoming one. But with the Christians, it's like your communion with God or Jesus doesn't negate your individuality. Um, that's how I think of it. It's more of a concrete ontology. Um, yeah. So how this kind of comes out is that the NFPs. Oh, also because of their difference in thinking. This is an excellent observation made in a CT article about the difference between ENFPs and ENTPs, and the reason that the ENFPs kind of just seem more joyful is that they don't have the introverted thinking, kind of like, oh, it's all one, it's all been done. They have the extroverted thinking, like extroverted thinking and introverted feeling, enjoyment of all the things based on the things themselves, not something that ties them together. So it just appears that there's more stuff to be quote unquote cognized. I believe that's the word that they use in that article. So the NFPs kind of like, they also have this unique perspective. They adore trinkets and oddities. It's kind of an ENFP thing. The individual beauty, not just kind of like the general unifying beauty of the NTPs, of like the absolute truth. They enjoy actual like individual beauty, and this individual beauty is especially a strength of the INFP because of their kind of like, their whole thing is like taking a unique perspective on things. Like everyone can like memorize facts and know facts and learn how to use facts. Like this is an INFP perspective, but not everyone can like take this filter on stuff and give this unique perspective that Ray Bradbury, for example, this interpretation, this like injection of magic, is how I describe the INFP. And then the ISTJs, they're like, the STJs in general actually are more like taking these internal kind of laws, almost like their values, because they're introverted feeling, but then they're like eternal values. They're like they're personal, but they're eternal. I don't know how to describe it, but there's a Roger Ebert quote where he's talking about like what he judges based on is like this feeling that something is true, has always been true, and is right. And it's almost like, because it's got that eternal introverted sensation aspect, it almost is like an extroverted feeling thing that you want to align with, but it's not quite. And that distinction there isn't quite clear to me. But they're using these quite personal yet eternal laws or rules, and they're kind of applying them based on extroverted thinking, and they're organizing things based on them, and they're making sure that like the world conforms to those things. And the ISTJ has more of an emphasis on like, you've got to apply these things so that you can kind of be like a light in the darkness for others. And the ESTJ is more, as the extrovert, is more about like applying these things, because if you don't, then other people will apply them in a more harmful way, and you have to fight against that as well. So yeah, it's the NFPs and the STJs. So now we're going to do the SFPs and the NTJs. And the SFPs and the NTJs, they have FI and TE, and then SE and NI. So they're not dealing with eternal truths like the NFPs and the STJs, and they're not dealing with the fuzzy ontology of the NFJs and the STPs. They're all about kind of, they're the Bayesians. They're crafting in the moment. They're using whatever introverted feeling values that they have, and they're putting it out there, whether that's through extroverted thinking or extroverted sensation, and including their unique perspective on the data, which is introverted intuition. So they're kind of like the dreamers to me. They have these kind of like very intense inner worlds, and they kind of like they get them out there and they get them forward, and they also they make manifest their dreams. So in the way that the NTJs do this is fairly obvious. The INTJ, of course, they they want this unique perspective and this the great man to kind of like conquer and rise above through TE. And then they've also got like a huge emphasis on introverted feeling, that you can't get like swayed by other people who'll try to knock you down. I had an INTJ teacher who was like spitting this in the face of society at one point in a class where he was going on kind of a passionate lecture. And then the ENTJs, maybe they don't want to spit in the face of society because it could be useful to them. They're more acquainted with the data, and they can move more easily through the data because they have that extroverted sensation. They're not putting a wall between themselves and the external data like the INTJs are, but they are doing the same interpretive strong perspective approach that the INTJ is doing. And then the SFPs, they're all about kind of like translating their inner warmth into tangible means, into means that others could experience through extroverted sensation if they were extroverted sensors. And so they're like being lights. They're like champions in the darkness, to use dramatic imagery. But so the ESFP is more about this energy and translating and really getting out the translation, doing the translation right through energy and making people feel something, a la Beyonce or whatever. Like you can really feel her inner warmth when you talk to her, is what somebody said, some quote on CT. And then the ISFP is more about, I don't think I've looked at the camera like once this entire time. The ISFP is about getting more accurately the dream world. Like Andrew Bird is such a great example. Like, it's just like, you can just tell he's got this like really complex kind of like intricate dream world, and he's trying to translate it, but it's not perfect. It's always experiential, and you can never fully get what the introverted intuition is trying to get across, the introverted intuition and the introverted feeling, but it is the same kind of magic that the INFP is doing. And the INFP is doing more kind of like interpretive magic, whereas the ISFP is doing more I don't know, archetypal magic. Just trying to pick up the difference between their NE and NI there. So yeah, those are the 16 types in a kind of very general, top-down way.